Okay, I'm here now. I hope you can hear me okay. So before we get started with class, something I wanted to ask about is that I know that the hostel is closing, and I know that a lot of students are going to be affected by this. And as I understand it, they're closing the hostel right now, right? On Sunday or something. Can you give me some clarity on when it's happening? I don't know. You don't know? I thought there were a few students who were at the hostel who attend class. Okay, well, then I guess we can have that conversation later. You, yeah, that's fine. You already know your exam's going to be online, right? Okay. So if you have any problems, please write to me. I've gotten a few emails, and if it just if the hostel does close, and just keep me posted on your individual situation, just write to me. I'll figure something out for you. Okay. Now, we started talking last class about social psychology, which is more specifically how people behave with each other, how they interact with each other, and we started talking about some sort of fascinating aspects of social psychology, like the foot in the door phenomena, where it's you do something once, even if it goes against your beliefs, you're more likely to do it again and incrementally. And we also talked about um, what did we? Ah, yes. We also talked about situations where an action uh, can reinforce a belief, but no, we didn't talk about that yet, although there is such a situation. Just a second. I think since you can't see me, you should be able to see the slide, and I'm just gonna go ahead and share the screen. Does that suit you? Can't see me, so stare at a pretty slide. Okay, let's do that. Uh, Here you go. So we were somewhere around. Right. Ah, okay. So we wrapped up cognitive dissonance, and we were talking about norms and values as they affect our interactions with people. And we talked a little bit about the differences between individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures. And I'll remind you of something. When we studied the topic before this, we actually said that there are certain patterns or similarities in the expression of emotion, right? In the manifestation of emotion. A smile is a smile, doesn't matter where it came from in the world. But when it comes to culture, it's within social psychology, the difference is as small as this. In our culture, if somebody says to you, okay, how are you? You're more likely to give a very detailed response on that. You're more likely to say, oh, I'm fine. I woke up this morning and there was no bijli, and then I did this, and then this happened, and mujhe roza lag raha hai, and this is what I'm going to eat for iftari, and this one is sick and this one is well, and that happened yesterday, and this is going to happen tomorrow, and then you're done. But in a lot of individualistic cultures, when the question, how are you, is asked, the answer is simple: I'm good, I'm fine. How are you? I'm good, I'm fine. If you vary from the script, it's actually considered to be, sorry, too direct. So, just small example of how culture affects our social interactions, right? What's acceptable, what's not. Moving on, one of the things that helps us interact with people is something that we have at birth. Okay? And this is this capacity to mimic people. Okay? So it's like automatic mimicry is just a phenomena that tries to explain how we, on an unconscious level, when we see someone smiling, we might start smiling. When we spend too much time with someone, we start talking like them, or we start, using similar language. It's something as small as, it's also mentioned, somebody yawns and you also yawn, right? So it's automatic mimicry is almost, you can think of it as like the inbuilt capacity for empathy, right? Because it just helps us relate to particular emotions and hence understand or feel what other people are feeling. This is why if you spend too much time with someone who's upset, you will also start to feel upset. This is why you should surround yourself with people who are, what do you say? You should surround yourself with people who are uplifting and not people who are going to pull you down, because there is a mood contagion that happens, right? Or rather, they're calling mood linkage. So, again, what you're seeing here is that there is some biological predisposition that allows human beings to relate to each other, to empathize with each other, and it is that sort of capacity for empathy and to be able to understand or relate to feelings. Remember, again, I remind you what I just said about feelings being pretty, the basic emotions being very common in different cultures, right? Uh, despite that, so not despite that, so that brings us right here where we are even able to, unconsciously, without effort, without trying, we can just, or we do pick up on these things. It's, a small example of this, somebody who has not lived in Pakistan for 20 years, if you listen to them speak English, especially if they've lived in a country where Urdu is not spoken at all. When you hear them speak English, they've lived there for 20 years, they rarely come back to Pakistan, their accent is going to be very reflective of whichever country they've lived in, right? They might pronounce certain words differently, so on and so forth. On the other hand, when they speak Urdu, they speak it just the same way as they do at home because they haven't really had exposure to people who speak it with a different accent, right? Why is it that, um, think about it, your cousins and relatives who've grown up in different countries, their way of speaking Urdu will very much match yours, but their way of speaking English will not. And that's because that's a dominant culture language. So it's a language that's spoken a lot more and a lot more around them. And then that's the tone and the accent that gets picked up. I don't know if you're following this, but if you have any questions, go ahead, please. I hate teaching with slides because of this, but just go ahead and, stop me at any point. Now, obviously, what this is saying is, okay, when, have you heard that expression, monkey see, monkey do? Um, so what that means is that at our essence as human beings, we are just going to do what other people are doing, which is another way of saying that we are almost like predisposed to be conformist, right? And by that it means acting, acting and thinking the same way as a group that we belong to thinks or acts. Um, and we do this enabled by our capacity for mimicry and enabled by how suggestible we are. Do you know this about human beings? We're very gullible. We think we're very smart, but no, we're actually, a little silly about this. We're very open to suggestion, okay? Particularly when things are conveyed to us with emotional overtones, we're very likely to buy into it. It's hard for us. Remember, earlier on, we talked about, when we were talking about emotion, we talked about how it's difficult for humans to correctly identify when there's a put on emotion, right? So fake smile is hard for us to tell it's a fake smile. Related to that is this, that we're very open to listening to the messages given to us that play on our emotions. And that openness is our suggestibility, where we may, let's say, we are impressionable to such messages. Okay. And coming to conformity, it's it's um it's not just about, that typical sort of situation that you see in movies where everybody in a particular group behaves exactly the same way. Conformity is more about an adjustment in your thinking as well, because unless you, to really be, okay, sorry, conformity means adhering to the same set of standards that everybody else is adhering to, right? Obviously, let's say we move to a new city, we move to a new country, we will not be able to always seamlessly fit in, right? We need to make adjustments so that we understand, okay, what I used to do back home when I used to honk and honk and honk for hours, and whenever I felt like it on the road, that's just bad road manners here. So I should stop doing it. Um, and so that's conformity. Sorry, whoa. That's the adjustment you make to be able to conform to certain acceptable behaviors, etc., right? And so the reason you're doing this is because you've just moved to this new country, you want to fit in. That's called normative social influence, meaning that there are norms that have influence, i.e., that will result in positive validation from the environment and the avoidance of negative feedback. So when you strive to make the adjustment, it is for this normative social influence, right? So it's not the norm to, stand in lane with your hand on the horn, and so you start changing that behavior. It is normative social influence. Okay, it's just not the norm. On the other hand, if you start, let's say, working in a different if you start working at a different organization, and the one you worked at before was very, cutthroat and very like, oh, uh, let's say Wall Street type situation, right? Very cutthroat, very competitive. So you think that that's what reality is. But then, and you're conforming at this point as well. Then you move to, let's say, a less cutthroat, more happy place. Like you start teaching at an elementary school, for instance, and you start to learn there that no, actually the world is a nice place, and children can be curious, and so on and so forth. Very extreme example, but that happens when your opinions about the world change, right? The way you see the world starts to change based on the society you're exposed to. That's called informational social influence. So normative social influence is basically a switch in the behaviors that is based on your desire to get approval. And informational social influence is a shift in your opinion about the world based on your willingness to be open to those opinions. You want to change the way you see the world, right? Now, obviously, there are certain situations where the most non-conformist of us, you guys, what can you see on my screen? Can you see the slide set? Because it says I'm sharing, but I don't think you can see the slides.
Yes, we can see.
You can see them now?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I lost power and it took some time to get back online. So what I was getting at was, we were talking about conformity, and I was telling you there are certain situations in which even the most non-conformist person feels a desire or the need to conform, right? And certain situations, like I've been giving you these examples of moving to a new country or moving to a new workplace, right? Those are situations where we might feel insecure, um, or we admire sort of what the dominant culture looks like. These are situations where We know that as, let's say, as immigrants, we are being observed by the larger group, so on and so forth. Now, that's a different situation. This sort of conformity can also happen in tiny situations, right? In small, micro level, instead of these big moves and these big shifts. So, just a small instance can be, sometimes, let's say, you're the only person who supports um, political party X, and you are in a group of people where everybody else supports political party Y. You are not going to engage in that sort of a situation. You're not going to engage in any political debate in that situation if you're smart, because there's no point to it, right? You're outnumbered. So in that situation, again, you're conforming with whatever the other people believe in, simply, even if it's for that limited time, just because it doesn't make sense, right? Um, Another thing could be when you are first interacting with a group of people, you're just making new friends, right? It's a new friends group. You just started studying at IBA. You are going to behave the same way as people in the group behave, at least initially, because you're just getting to know each other, right? So you're more likely to conform to how your friends think and how your friends behave, because you just don't know each other well enough. So, like it says here, you haven't made a prior commitment to behaving in any other way. And so, again, like, you are conforming for social value, for benefit. Okay, that's something I need you to remember here. We conform and we are innately enabled to conform through automatic mimicry, which we just talked about, because of this quality that conformity is adaptive. It does help us survive. It helps us create groups, create collectives, and operate those collectives that help us towards our survival, right? And related to this is obviously obedience. This is the Milgram study, which we've talked about so many times. Um, and the important thing here, I suppose, is just to remind you again, this is one of the most clear examples of conformity, which it looks like obedience, right? And also, can you imagine this level of cognitive dissonance that the people must have been feeling, because clearly they didn't want to give electric shocks to someone, but they went ahead and did it because they were conforming with those instructions, right? Um, so again, just, and this is one of the ethical problems also with the study, by the way, that people are really traumatized by it. They had a lot of PTSD. Now, just because human beings are open to conforming and are suggestible does not mean that the element of free will or choice is completely gone, right? You still have to make the right choices. So it's like, if you hang out with a bunch of degenerate people who rob and kill people, and you rob and kill people, and when you get caught you say, oh, it wasn't me, I was just trying to fit in and make friends. No, right? You are still making a choice to engage with that group of people. You could make that conscious choice to avoid that behavior and still be part of this group of people, but you didn't do that, right? Or on a much less dramatic movie theater level example, much smaller real life example. If you are part of a group of friends and your group of friends likes to go out every night and go to parties or go to expensive dinners, and that's not something you like to do, right? That's not something you can do. Um, you have to make that very clear and you have to make that choice. And there is the potentiality of social rejection, particularly at your age. It's not that bad when you get older. But at your age, because peer groups are still in formation, right? You're still forming your peer groups. You might have known your closest friends 10 years, but I can guarantee you that that might not last another 10 years. Because you are right now changing. And again, formative time in your life. So if at the moment you are friends with people and there are certain things they do that you don't want to do, you have every capacity within you because you are a human being capable of free will. You have the capacity within you to resist those or conforming to those behaviors that are not desirable to you. And of course, this will, might, possibly, I don't know, might result in you not having access to that group of people anymore. Because remember, groups operate on the basis of conformity, right? So if a group doesn't have anything holding it together, it will fall apart in a nutshell. So, you know, something that you should remember, you do have free will, but there's only that much that free will can do. You're young and impressionable, so be careful with the choices you make, you know. Something important takeaways from Milgram would simply be that one of the ways in which conformity is enforced is through a legitimate authority figure. Okay, and this legitimacy comes from the fact that Milgram study के अंदर अगर आप उसको example लो, the person giving the orders was let's say corroborated, supported by the institution, and very important, the victim of the violence was not someone known to the people who were pressing the button, and there was nobody who was non-conformist, so there was no role model either. Remember, we're suggestible, right? Human beings are suggestible. If we had seen somebody else throwing a fit about this and saying, I'm not going to do it, then perhaps they do not press the button and they do not obey the instruction. If it's perhaps violence inflicted on someone they know, they will not conform with that violence, they will not engage in that violent behavior. um, As I say this, do you think this is something you are seeing in the world around you right now? Well, you should be seeing these things in the world around you right now. There's a great deal of violence in the world around you right now. Where is it coming from? Whether it's whether you think about the alt right or you think about, you know, um, ISIS, or you think about domestic terrorism, these rules apply. This is how these groups work. This is how they appeal to people. Think about the suggestibility of people, right? And again, these groups rely on different examples of institutions that apparently uphold them. And that's how they get their credibility or their authority, right? Terrorist groups that are based on religions use the religion for their own credibility and to inspire people towards violence. Alt-right groups have created their own little sort of, I guess it is a belief system, which is QAnon, right? And they use that to support their violent actions. So again, you have to think about these things. They're very, you can see them around the world today if you just think about it a little bit. Um, Now, coming to what I think we've sort of been talking about quite a bit, this is going to be interesting to you because you're currently working in groups on a particular task, which is a presentation. So, the reason you're doing this presentation in groups is because you will learn from each other, etc., etc. Now, as you work with your presentation groups, you will realize that different people in your group might be acting differently. Okay. Some people in your presentation group might be speaking up more and exhibiting that they know the class content a lot more than you ever thought they did. That is social facilitation. Maybe they prepare for your group meetings because they know they're going to be in your presence, in the presence of a group. Some people may not really do the work or may not be as serious about it, and those are people who are just riding along on other people's contributions and they feel कि सब काम कर रहे, So I don't have that much individual responsibility. Okay, whether I'm in this group or another group, it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to chill out. That's called social loafing, right? And so what you're seeing essentially is that the presence of other people can cause one of two changes in our behavior. Either we become better at things we already know how to do or things that are easy, or we decide it's not worth it because we're part of a group, right? And this is, remember, applicable on group tasks. We're part of a group, the group can do everything it needs to. I don't need to do much, right? Um, and sometimes it can do both. So, like it says here, you can lose your self restraint in the presence of a group. Um, so you also lose your identity. And so it's like this is what happens when, um, let's say, when a mob loses its what's okay sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Mob violence is an example of this phenomena called de-individuation. When you're part of a group, you might lose sense of your own identity and your own self-awareness, right? And along with that, you also give up on your own self-restraint, i.e., your ability to control your behaviors, your ability to, remember I told you, make a choice, right? And so when that happens, and this only happens in situations like this where you know that your identity doesn't matter, you're pretty much anonymous, you're part of this giant group of people, and you're very physiologically aroused by whatever's happening around you. So group violence, or a nicer example might be, you remember, like pre-pandemic, there used to be these things called concerts that people would go to, with large groups of people would just go and stare at somebody on a stage performing some music or some theater or something like that. Think about the music example, right? So when you look at a video ever of a music concert, you will notice that there are always people in the crowd who look like they're about to faint because they're just like so into the music and whatever. um, it's literally like they don't care who's watching. People will shout and dance and behave in ways that they don't usually behave in as part of that giant group of concert listeners or concert attendees, because you've lost your identity. There's de-individuation, and you're not bound by any kind of self-restraint because nobody really knows who you are, right? Have you ever been in that sort of situation? Well, I hope that one day, someday, because you're so young, um, the pandemic ends and you're able to go to a concert because it's really a lot of fun. But that's the best example that I can give you of the individuation. Now, this I talked to you a little bit about, where, when you're part of a group, you want to agree with them. And the thing is that groups, remember, I said that the value of conformity is that it allows the group to have something that keeps it together, a group standard that everyone adheres to. So, this process of group polarization, what it refers to is that because everyone's conforming to that belief system, that value system, the more the group exists, the more the preferences, the beliefs, the values of that group continue to become stronger and more deeply entrenched. That's called group polarization. आप जिस भी group के member हो, उसमें whatever the fundamental things tying the group together are, they become stronger and stronger because the members of the group are all conforming and all supporting and all upholding those beliefs and attitudes, right? Um, so that's polarization. A different but related sort of phenomena is that you are part of a group, and because you're part of a group, you are all thinking the same way. Not you're kind of approaching something from a group perspective rather than taking your own individual critical thinking towards it, which means that you often miss out on some core details of reality. Right? Have you ever heard some news about something like, group tried to, uh, okay, very good, actually, very good example could be in the US, we had these protests, right, in January, where they broke into the state capitol in DC, and they kind of like thought they were going to kill the US speaker and stuff. And when you listen to that, you're like, but what kind of fools came up with this plan? Right? Like, why would you, what? Their behavior is a perfect example of group think. Completely disregards the reality, right? The reality that, well, actually, when you storm your own country's capital and you try to revolt against your country, you're a traitor to the democracy of your country, right? It's treasonous behavior, it's violent behavior, it's not acceptable behavior. But obviously, the people who were engaged in the riots didn't see it that way. So, what you're seeing is group think. You are not thinking about the actual realities. Okay. Um, and this example is very relevant, but I don't expect you to know what the Bay of Pigs invasion is. This was a result of a standoff with Cuba, one of many in the United States, where none of the government realized that the invasion of Cuba would be a complete mess for the US because the distance between Cuba and the US is not that much, and Cuba would be able to retaliate, and that's kind of exactly what happened. But none of the people in the government looked at the realities of the situation because they were all thinking about it in the way that we are Americans, we should enforce democracy, this is our job, nobody can say anything to us, blah, blah, blah. And so, again, what you're seeing is that when you become part of a group, you still have so personal control, right? You still have, remember we talked about personal control, locus of control, internal, external, self-restraint. Last class में हमने बात किया था about these elements of personal control, right? So obviously जब आप एक group का member होते हो, you do have personal control, right? You have your own individual control of your behavior and your actions. It's not कि वो बस चला जाता है, गायब हो जाता है the minute you step into a group setting. However, the situation also exert some control over you, right? The norms and values that bind you also exert some control over you. And so the two things kind of mix together, they interact to affect and impact the way that you behave. It's like, if you ever feel very angry at somebody who's older than you, in our culture, you don't get to, mouth off to that person. So the social setting interacts with your own sort of personal control where you say, okay, I'm just going to restrain my temper. I'm not going to behave this way because it's not good behavior, right? Social control is interacting with your personal control to affect your behavior. Now, imagine this thing. Yes, we're very motivated by groups. Yes, we really need groups, etc., etc. But think about it. There was once a little tiny dictator who created the most evil 5, 6, 7 years of humanity that we have seen in modern history. Right? He literally incinerated human beings in the most ruthless um, and awful, hate-filled way possible. I'm talking about Hitler. If you were confused, 1939 to 1945, when World War II happened. Right? One man was able to exert the kind of influence that led to the near extermination of a particular religious group as well as other oppressed minorities. And this spread all over Europe. It did not stay contained to just Germany, right? World War II was fought in many other countries as well and had an impact. That's why it's called World War. But it started with this one dude, right? That's called minority influence. But minority influence can also work for the good, right? So, an example of a positive minority influence could be, um, let me think. I think it's been a long time since I thought about positive role models. Do you have any suggestions? Evie. Um, yes, but he just did something that everybody already agreed was good, right? Let me hmm I know. No, much closer to your age. Greta Thunberg. She's a climate activist. She's, I think, only 16 years old. And she's told off Donald Trump. She has, hung out with David Attenborough. She's done like strikes outside her own school. Her own school has been held accountable to start recycling and go green, etc., etc. She's really amazing young person. Um, Greta Thunberg is a climate activist, and she has been able to, I think she's also addressed the United Nations General Assembly. She's now started going all over the world and spreading awareness of climate change. She's one little kid, right? The power of one individual to sway majorities is called minority influence. Greta Thunberg is a minority influence. Malala Yousafzai is a minority influence. Martin Luther King, very good example, also minority influence, because for example, Martin Luther King was able to organize in the time before cell phones, you guys, and also a time where not everybody had a phone in their house. He was able to organize a long march across the United States of America, which is a huge country, for civil rights, right? To get people to get out of their houses and come together against systemic oppression that they have faced on God knows some really terrible levels, to inspire them to that level. That's minority influence, right? To shake these majorities out of their oppression. Malala is unfortunately undervalued in her own country, which breaks my heart. Um, but Malala absolutely has a great deal of minority influence because the entire majority of the West is inspired by Malala to take education for girls seriously and to take education for refugees seriously. And Malala should get more credit for it from Pakistanis, but we're really good at doing away with anything that's actually good, um, especially when girls do good things. It's very hard for us. So now, talking about antisocial relationships or negative behaviors. Do you remember I told you to take the implicit bias test when we were studying when we were studying cognitive biases, right? And uske andar, I don't know if you guys took the test or not, but there's implicit meaning internal, unconscious, unacknowledged biases about race. I don't know if you took those or not, but did anybody, Ujala, you're saying you took it. If you took that test, what did it reveal to you about yourself? If you are comfortable to share. Okay, you are not comfortable to share. That's okay. All right. So negative social behaviors are, well, pretty self-explanatory. Behaviors where we don't, well, no, the negative social behaviors are where we don't really treat other people very well. Okay, that's why they're called antisocial behaviors. And obviously, the most widespread negative social behaviors come from our desire to disregard out groups and to protect our own in group. Um, However, in their extreme sense, those mean that we are prejudiced towards members of other groups that are different from us. When you study, if you study any sort of political science or uh, colonialism or history of colonialism class at IBA, which I recommend you should, when you do that, you will study this theory of um, the other, okay, with a capital O, which was Edward Said's theory, and it said that the West has otherized the East, and the East is the Orient, and it's, you know, exotic and dangerous and barbaric and uncivilized. And that categorization is what allows the West to stand as superior and intellectual and, you know, able to take control and respectable, right? And without that otherization, the West cannot be powerful, right? There has to be something that it exerts power over, right? So the colonial states like Britain had to ensure that India, for instance, was seen as an uncivilized, barbaric, disgusting place that they had a moral responsibility to fix, right? So again, without that otherization, Britain doesn't get to have any grounds to colonize India, right? Um, and yes, it's very much like us and them. And otherization exists on every level. And like I said, prejudice, right? Beliefs or stereotypes, and then the emotions associated with those beliefs. And then you're predisposed to behave poorly or to discriminate against people of a particular different group, um, because you truly just believe, number one, that, and unjustifiably and not based in reality. This belief is unjustifiable and it's not based in reality. It's a generalized view, right? um, it's a stereotype. So part of it is that. Second, because of that belief, you have a hostility or a fear, or hostility or fear towards members of a different group. And that is why when you interact with them, you are predisposed to discriminate negatively, not positively, negatively towards them, right? Um, and also, this is a further interesting phenomena that given that now it's becoming increasingly unacceptable socially to express prejudice against someone, people are people have modified their prejudicial antisocial behaviors to non-verbal ones or microaggressions, which we've talked about sometimes, right? How do you speak English so well? And the implication there is, here's a stereotype: you belong to a third world poor country, your country is a terrorist country, you all speak Arabic, you're all you all hate us, right? And so there's hostility and there's fear associated with that. And to bring the power dynamic back, that person is going to try and put you down by reminding you that you are from an inferior group. How do you speak this language that I speak? How do you speak it so well? You get it? Right? Um, And so obviously race is something that really clearly, racism clearly demonstrates this human capacity to be awful to each other. And I think the one thing we can say, benefit of the doubt, a lot of our racial biases, the reason they're unconscious is because they've been created using the information that we've been exposed to. The information that we've been exposed to about different people or people from different races, and this is true also of people for different nationalities. The information we receive is often and never actually, it's never free of an agenda, right? It's always given to you with something in mind. So um, we are taught when we're little that Indians are bad and that Indians hate Pakistanis, and so as Pakistanis we should also hate Indians. This is such a sad thing because people have families in India that they no longer speak to, blood relatives, because of this sort of demonization, and it's happening on both sides. It's happening on both sides, absolutely. And you would be surprised that, like, really educated and otherwise open and forward thinking people will also come to you and say this nonsense like all Indians hate us. Like, no, dude, no, that's really not how it works, right? It's literally a country of like a billion people. How can you make that generalization? But you buy into that, right? Um, and in the same way, race influences perception. Okay? I don't know if you have or ever will live in a country where your race is a minority race, where you become a person of color. And when that happens, if that happens, this will make more sense to you. But white people will respond to you very differently because you are not white unless you behave like them and you dress like them and you get rid of everything that is, let's say, Pakistani and brown about you, and you fit, right? You become a member of the white group, a second class member because you're not actually white, but it helps white people to overcome and to be friends with you. And again, I want to say there are white people who are not racist. Okay, I have some very good friends. Some of my closest friends are white women, right? Um, who have really grown and evolved and don't have racist tendencies or are able to check their racist tendencies, right? But coming back to this and social psychology and antisocial behaviors, I I think at the most extreme, what you're seeing right now in the US with attacks against Asian Americans because of stupid, I know I'm not supposed to use that word, I am, Donald Trump, where Asians are being attacked all over the country because of Trump's idiotic, ill informed, I don't even know, I want to say it's pure evil proclamations that Asians caused coronavirus. And so, just recently, as last week, a 21-year-old Pakistani girl had acid thrown in her face, right? A few weeks before that, an Asian American run salon was broken into and there was a shooting there. उसके actually एक हफ्ते के बीच में a particular, I've forgotten the type of thing, but there's a facility and a gunman broke into it. It's a majority Sikh people work there, and again 5 or 6 people were killed there. So it's like this becomes really bad. um, these antisocial behaviors that are coming from these, right? What's the belief? The belief is that all Asians are responsible for coronavirus, okay? Because Asians hate us or China hates us or whatever. And the emotion is fear, hostility. Who are these people? We don't know them. They are not white. We can't trust them, right? And then the behavior becomes violence. They hurt us, they killed people in our country because they brought coronavirus in our country. If we get rid of them, our country will heal. The belief has no basis in reality, right? But how can it? It's coming from a stereotype, which again is unjustified and also has no basis in reality. Gender prejudice is also related to this. Okay, um, even though in many countries femicide or the killing of female children has stopped, in many others, including our own, it continues, right? In our country, particularly, women's bodies are owned by the community, by the family. So women don't get to make a lot of choices about, let's say, how they're going to have their babies or how many babies they can have without dying, right? Um, Gender discrimination, gender prejudice may have declined in a lot of parts of the world, but in our part of the world, it is terrifying how bad it is to be a woman in this country today. It is terrifying. And I am telling you that as a grown up, that the discrimination against women at work, at the grocery store, on the streets is so hostile. It's so hostile that it's terrifying, right? And that I haven't even talked about the violence against women, and I don't want to right now. But let's just say that that is again gender prejudice or the belief that particular gender is inferior is again the same thing as antisocial. It will result rather in antisocial or negative social behaviors. So think through this, okay? Um, And one last thing about this is unconscious patronization related to this holding of unconscious bias. Many people may think that they are not racist and they are not biased. And so when I took this implicit test, by the way, I realized that I was racist. Yeah. Um, and anyway, so unconscious patronization, again, you don't realize you have the bias, okay, but you still end up acting like it and you don't even pick up on it yourself, right? It's very like it's pretty much it's completely unconscious. You just don't realize, for example, that as a teacher maybe you have different expectations of different students and those come into your grading. That's why when we're grading, a lot of people actually don't even know whose paper they're grading if they can help it, so that it helps them maintain objectivity in that way, right? So that's an example here, unconscious patronization. So I guess we'll stop here. But I have a question for you. You will not like this question. Actually, maybe you will. Do you know what is the date for the last class? Because I think Eid will happen by the 13th, right? It's the 11th. Yeah, I think also it's the 11th. Well, I didn't get a chance to teach you personality theory yet. So I would really like you to learn that. The applied psychology stuff is fine. You'll cover it anyway in different courses. But I really wanted to teach you that. So would you be open to a class on Saturday, a slightly longer class, where we can finish this stuff? Because next week, remember, you're just doing your presentations, and then we've got one class left, right? Um, on 10th May. So, what is a good time for you on Saturday? Would you be able to do 11 to 1? Your presentation is on 8th May. I'm talking about 1st May. I don't know what an IEGC is. 2 to 4. I am confused. You want to have the class 2 to 4? Is that what
Um,
you communicate?
Basically, the time for our presentation is not confirmed yet. Like we were supposed to vote, but the timing is not confirmed yet. There were three slots that ma'am gave us to choose from.
Okay. And have you chosen your slot?
We have, but like the final timing is not confirmed. I guess it would be confirmed today, maybe later today.
Okay. So why don't you send me an email once your timings are confirmed? Can you guys do that? Everybody who's taking this, what does that stand for? IEGC?
It's intermediate English grammar and composition.
Fun. Okay. Um, just let me know, right? And then we can figure it out. I would like to really like to teach you guys this. You've been such a good class. Um, and I think I also have one other class that I skipped with you, so it's like a makeup class belatedly. So let me know, and I'll communicate the time in a post, okay? um, or I'll tell the TAs to WhatsApp you. Don't say that I'm gonna stop now. Stop. Class is ending. I will see you on Saturday. And whatever time you guys let me know. I'll wait to hear back from you. Please let me know tonight because I have a lot to do on Saturday. I need to work around that. Okay. Aisha, you have a question?
Okay, Miss. So basically, in today's lecture, there were few theories that I remember from my A levels business studies of theories of motivation, like the theory of X and Y, and
Mm-hmm.
there was some categorization of achiever and leader, what these person are. So, um, can those theories be are applicable in this context as well? Because I was really able to relate to and remember those theories while we were studying this.
Yeah, you're so what? Can you refer me to whose theories they are, or a little bit more?
The theory of X and Y of Douglas McGregor, and there was another theory where the type of people they were, like there were some people who were very socializing, and then there were leaders and achievers who used to work in isolation. I can remember that theory's name particularly, but theory of X and Y was of Douglas McGregor. So like those were the theories of motivation that we have studied in business studies in A levels.
Mm-hmm. What's the question, Bachchu?
So, it's like are those applicable in this context that we are studying right now?
They
Like
could,
because they're influenced by
they
they're
could.
in because like in the theory of X and Y, uh, जो X वाली category के people were those जो के they were reluctant to work, and Y वाले were very motivated. So it was like that the theory suggested that if we are going to put the some people from X to Y, तो
Mm.
वो Y में रह के वो भी वैसे behave करने लगेंगे, and they'll start to work as well. They'll be motivated to work.
It's is it a theory of management styles, and you should manage people like this or that?
Yeah, sort of like how to motivate people. Yeah.
Yeah. You can use that to apply. You can definitely apply some of it. I mean, it's related, but again, we're not talking about theories or organizational psych, right? We're talking about pure social psychology. तो जो आपने पढ़ा है वो organizational psych. Let me be clearer. It's the application of social psychology to organizational psychology, right? So it's using the principles of group perception and power and dynamics within a group. And what is, remember, also conformity also enters this. So it's using these principles of social psychology and applying them to the business world, which is why I'm saying that yes, it's absolutely related, but right now that's not what we're talking about, right? We're just doing the core principles, and this theory is coming from those principles. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, cool. Anybody else? Raima, if you have class from 2 to 4, okay. So another thing I'm gonna be doing now is कि जो हमारी classes हुई हैं in the past 2 weeks, I'm gonna post recordings of all of those because I think some students have had a lot of challenges with waking up, and that's okay. It's fine. It's totally okay. So I'll post these recordings, और जो फिर सैटरडे को क्लास होगी अगर 11 to 1 होगी तो प्लीज अटेंड, अगर नहीं मतलब जो भी जब भी होगी आई विल पोस्ट अ रिकॉर्डिंग ऑफ इट, ठीक है? You're most welcome. All right. So anybody else have anything, or are you guys just here because you're asleep? Anusha, Mariam, and Umema, are you here because you're asleep? This is being recorded. Cool. Um, I'm just gonna let this get recorded.